All right, and now we have our server RPC. Let's make a function that's called shoot. And it needs to have the same inputs that event had. So let's do that. Camera. Location. Camera forward vector. And muzzle location. Let's actually hook that up so we don't forget. Camera location, camera forward vector, muzzle location. We only want to shoot on the server. Let's line trace by channel. This is that visibility trace. So you could have camera, whichever one, but it defaults to that. So I figured that'd be easiest. Ignore self. We won't draw the debug unless we start getting problems. And we'll start at the camera's location. So how far are we going to shoot? We're going to do the forward vector. We're going to multiply by a scalar. So we need to change that to a float. And this will be shoot trace distance. So this will determine how far we're tracing out. So let's just make that 100,000. Yeah, 100,000. Go to variable, you can change it. So whenever you take a forward vector, which is a direction, and you multiply it by what's called a scalar afloat, it's going to say, hey, in this direction, shoot that far out. And so when you add so I'll show you, if you add our start location, then you get the end trace. So it's basic vector math, but if you've never done vector math, that could be a little confusing. So look at it this way. You got the camera where it's starting from. So imagine a camera there. You have the direction that the camera is pointing, which is the forward vector. And you're saying from the camera's location, in the direction it's going, I want to shoot out that far to shoot trace distance, because a forward vector is a unit. What do they call that? A unit vector, I believe. It's a normalized vector. And so it's got a size of 1. And basically you're increasing that vector's size by the shoot trace distance when you multiply it by a scalar. So yeah, basic. I think that might even be in the first person example. I'm not sure. Okay, so this will do a line trace. Basically a line trace just shoots a line out and it looks for things. It does a query on the world to see, okay, what did I hit? And when it hits something, it spits out a return right here. So you can drag out here, you can either split it or you can break it. And it's quite extensive, as you can see. And it tells you everything about what it hit. And so you could either do it from the break, or you can plug it right off of here like that. So if you hit something, we're going to do some logic. If we don't hit it, we're going to do some other logic. So let's say that line trace does hit something. Here we're going to start with that. So we're going to get our input muzzle location. And to be right, we should do in, just in case you were to ever add a member variable called one of these things. We don't want to get confused. We want to make sure we're always pulling these local variables. So here we go. In muzzle location, that is that variable that is coming in. So we're going to call find look at rotation, and the target is going to be the impact point. There it is. And that's going to be our shoot rotation. So let's promote that to a local variable. Okay, so what that does is when we spawn this projectile, it's got to have an angle that it's moving at, because that that projectile movement component is going to send it. It's going to send it out into the world going a certain direction. Basically, we're trying to say what direction that projectile is going to be traveling at, and to do that, we need to find it. We need to calculate the rotation. And what we're doing is we're saying, okay, from where the muzzle's at, the rotation it would take to look at its impact point, which is where the line hit. Now, if it doesn't hit anything, we're just going to shoot straight out. So it'll be the rotation from just straight out of your gun to where to infinity, basically. So let's do that calculation. Let's grab the muzzle location and our target instead of the impact point. If we didn't have anything, we're just going to use where our trace stops. So I said infinity. I didn't mean that. I meant where the trace stops. Now your projectile will travel as far as you allow its lifespan, which we're going to limit. So shoot rotation, we'll set it. So if we do hit something, it's up here. If we don't hit something, if our line trace doesn't hit anything, it's just going to shoot out of the gun and keep going the direction that the muzzle is pointed. Now we need to actually spawn the projectile. It's going to be our projectile class. CF projectile. Always spawn, ignore collisions. We always want it to spawn. Owner and instigator are going to be the same. Normally, you would have to have, let's see, an actor, so that would be the gun. But since our gun isn't an actor, it's a skeletal mesh since we already have it. Normally, if you were building a weapon system, it would be its own. It could be its own actor, but we're just going to say self for both. Instigator is always a pawn, and that's who fired it. You could put in a controller. You could pass in whatever data you want into here, really, as long as they're of the right types. And basically, you would then use that when the projectile hits something. You could say, so-and-so was killed by a shotgun by, and whatever the player's name is. That's why you would pass in that information. Also, replication information could also use that. All right, so we got to make our transform. Let's split this. I'm going to keep our scale the same. We're going to spawn it from the muzzle's location, so let's grab that. Then we want the shoot rotation. And that's about it. Oh, no. Okay, I'm hitting the Q key. It's not working. We'll just manually do it. There we go. All right, that's good enough. We'll just call this shoot. All right, so I want to point out if we did not pass this data onto here and we shot from the server, it'd be fine. If we shot from the client, though, it's to my knowledge, there's no that data is not already on the server from other clients, all that camera information. So basically, we're saying every time you press the shoot key, we send the camera's location and its vector and the muzzle location. We send all of that to the server so that we can make our calculations. Because I don't think it has any clue where you're at. I could be wrong, but I haven't found it already replicated. Plus, if we're only doing this every time we shoot, that's not that big of a deal. If you were doing a fully automatic weapon, maybe we'd have to look at a different solution. But this, I don't think is too expensive to do. If it did become a concern, we could either search harder to see if that information already does exist on the server, or do some custom logic to make it more efficient. All right, let's try this out. Okay, so as you can see, this client shot and he saw it. So, that one was moving. Must be colliding with it. Like it hit something and collide. Maybe itself. Okay, so let's shrink those down. On the projectile size, most projectiles, or a lot of them, are 9 millimeters, so it's about a centimeter. We'll do one. See if that fixes that we were seeing. Yeah. Now going this slow, we could run into it, but let's make sure our targeting is working right. So let's shoot for in this square. Dead on. My hand does kind of bump the mouse a little bit, so if that about the center of that top cube there. Yeah. Good. So the traces are working there. Let's see if the traces are working properly for the player. No, it looks like it's hitting that collision body. And then pull out here. Okay, let me try to shoot between his legs. Confirm that it's hitting hitting his collision sphere. So let's fix that. Projectile sphere. Look at its collision. Reset. We didn't change its type, so let's start by doing that. Projectile. Shoot his shoulder. There we go. That's pretty close. It's hitting. It actually hits their collision, and the collision isn't always usually simplified, which to be more performant. Cool. All right, so that is working. The collision is working correctly. So let's make that a little more realistic. Projectile. I'm gonna leave the debug on for now. You can turn that off whenever, just simply by doing the hidden in game and turning that off. Yeah, or making that true. I like to be able to see where my projectile dials are going, but I will. Let's speed it up a little bit. Let's see, speed. Let's make it like, I don't know. Still a little slow, but step up. Maybe you'll do 10,000 or more. If you're doing long distances, you'll really know it, and you'll really need to speed it up. Another thing here, lifespan. So I'm going to leave. I don't want my projectiles hanging around for longer than 4 seconds. All right. And now let's run the logic for when this thing actually hits something, so it actually causes some damage. Okay, let's class defaults. I'm going to check something here. See tick, start with tick enabled. No. Don't know if we need that. Turning off the ticks. I don't think we need any ticks just because there can be a lot of these things. So we want to try to save performance anywhere we can on something. There's going to be millions, well, not millions, but maybe thousands in the world, possibly. It depends, I guess, on how many people are shooting and how fast they're shooting. So maybe even thousands, hundreds. How about that? So let's go to the sphere. We select that. Do the on component hit. I'll get the sphere right here. We're going to make a function that will apply damage. So let's make that function. Okay, so let's call that. So apply damage is going to have a check so that it's on the server, but hit events will fire on the client as well since we have this replicated. So let's do an event here. Play hit effects. I'm okay with hit effects going off purely by the client authorizing it because there's no consequence of a hit effect going off. So for example, you really wanted to be strict about it, you would have the server verify that what you hit and then send play hit effects to all the clients via like a multicast. That would be a perfect time to use a multicast event. But we don't need to do that because it's of zero consequence to have a particle effect go off and maybe it's not the exact spot or it's a little off or it's a little weird because the client thinks that this component hit in a slightly different spot than the server. It's not going to be enough to notice, and it would be a waste of networking to call multicast event to play your hit effects when you already have events being triggered that you can use. So we're just going to say, hey, when this component hits something, play your hit effects. We could add logic that says, hey, check this and check that. That's not a problem. But I don't want to wait till we get on the server and then broadcast to everybody that we hit something. That seems kind of wasteful. So let's run this logic. We only want to do it once. Do once node. I mean, it's just basically you can only do it once. It's like a bool basically is set and it won't let it trigger off again until it gets reset right here. As far as what we do need the hit. So let's bring in the hit. Let's just say hit result, say in hit. We're going to break that out. But before we go any further, let's actually pass it along. We want to, so visibility is replicated when you set it, but collision is not. So what I want to do before we get too far down this road is once this thing hits something, I want to remove its collision. So set collision response to all channels. I want it to just ignore. Because it's no point having a bullet there that you can, for whatever reason, step up on or cause weird collisions to occur. So we just want to disable. Once that thing is hit, it's dead. And you really shouldn't see it anymore. I mean, you can make arguments for maybe rocket launchers, projectiles, but we're not getting near that. Yeah, it's that would even explode. So we can just say it's gone. So we're going to ignore all collision once it hits something on both the client and the server. We can't just set it on the server because it wouldn't replicate down on the client, and they'd still see. Then you'd have a mismatch, which is very unusual to have server collision different than client. That's when you see a lot of the jitters on things. That's because there's a mismatch between collisions between the client and server.